Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 496, The Dress Rehearsal. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today's show will feature The Dress Rehearsal. Here, I look at the imaginary territories and how they help us prepare for the next existence, whatever lies beyond death. Also, the imaginary territories help us navigate through life. Today's show will feature background footage from Big Butt Trail. Big Butt Trail is located off the Blue Ridge Parkway at Walker Knob Overlook. To get there from Asheville, North Carolina, take the Blue Ridge Parkway heading north. Go past Craggy Gardens. Maybe about 5 miles past Craggy Gardens, there'll be an overlook on the left side of the parkway. It's not much of an overlook. It's more like a pull-off, for you're surrounded by woods, not much of a vista. So you pull off at this little parking area, and Big Butt Trail is located well off to the left. If you go straight, you go on Mountains to Sea Trail heading north, and then across the parkway is Mountains to Sea Trail heading south. Anyway, so there's signs saying which trail is which. So you get on the Big Butt Trail, it goes down a little bit, and then it starts going up again. Eventually, you come to Point Misery. And maybe a little after that, I turned around. However, a little bit beyond Point Misery, maybe another half a mile or a mile, is Little Butt. And then maybe another half a mile past that is Big Butt. And then past Big Butt, the trail plunges to Highway 197 between Barnardsville and Burnsville. Anyway, so now it is time for the dress rehearsal. Now it is time for the dress rehearsal. Well, I have Meryl with me, my cat, who is purring. The microphone might pick up the purring. And maybe you saw Meryl during the intro. I'm not sure if he came into camera range or not. I was concentrating on my delivery. Anyway, so let's continue on. The dress rehearsal. The dress rehearsal for what? Are we doing a play here? No. This is the dress rehearsal for life. And it goes beyond that. It's really the dress rehearsal for the next existence, beyond life. So you're getting ready for something. You're advancing to higher levels, at least in theory, as you're drawn closer to God and you get to know God's way better. Or if you're an atheist, you're being drawn towards the nature of reality, to the space of nothingness, of non-existence, out of which everything arises. So nothing is everything. So it is important to understand nothing. When you truly do, well, you obtained enlightenment. But we have to move further, at least to try to understand the nature of reality and the nature of ourselves. So there it hangs the tale, discovering ourselves. Well, I guess to help me discover myself and to kind of advance me along and to give me something to aspire to, I have the imaginary territories. Well, why not aspire directly to God? Well, and I guess in a way I am. I just don't like to emphasize that out of humility and also to avoid possible conflict and confrontation. Once you say you aspire to God, you're associated with God. Well, next thing you know, you're going to say you know God's will. And somebody else is going to say, no, that's not right, because they know God's will. So let's just dial it back a notch. We're not quite to God, and we're not in our earthly realm either. We're kind of in between us and God, in the imaginary territories. Imaginary territories of thought, governed by your value system. As your values change, your imaginary territory you are associated with changes. Well, this happens at a variable rate. Sometimes your imaginary territory might change minute to minute. Other times, you could be associated with the same imaginary territory for years on end, perhaps most of your life. Everyone's different. But I guess if you look at it realistically, I guess we really do change our imaginary territory that we're associated with quite often. Well, because our values shift quite often. They shift a little this way and a little that way, perhaps to justify something we want. We might have to do something morally compromising to get what we desire. And I'm sure there's many other examples too, where our values might temporarily change to get some end or to meet some goal or perhaps to help someone out. Okay, so we have the East Side imaginary territory. That's where I'm from. That's what I'm associated with. I guess I might not say I'm part of it. Well, perhaps I'm not good enough to be part of it, but I aspire to be part of it. I'm associated with it. I like to think I help out the East Side imaginary territory, and perhaps the East Side imaginary territory helps me out. What am I talking about? Well, as I said, your imaginary territory is governed by your value system. What about the East Side? Well, the East Side, when they're looking for a partner in life, they're looking for someone with a good personality, someone they get along well with, someone who they could aspire to, look up to, someone to help them out, and someone who perhaps could lend to someone who perhaps needs our help. But it's much more than that. It's about honesty and compassion and empathy and trying to help everyone, particularly poor people and disadvantaged people, to help them gain the most benefit possible from whatever money might be available, government money, corporate money, and even our volunteer hours. Well, what's the West Side about? Well, the West Side favors deception over honesty. The West Side think it's fine to use deception to advance your career, where the East Side would think that's despicable. Well, the West Side, well, they would use their deception to advance their career and then, of course, keep it a secret, where the East Side would love to expose someone who used deception to advance their career. They would love to expose the deception and have them demoted back to their old job. For deception should not be used to advance your career. Everything should be done in an honest and upfront manner, with everyone having equal opportunity and everyone advancing, hopefully together, and hopefully the lowest wage earners, well, having a chance to earn more and earning more on the East Side than they would on the West Side. For the West Side favors wealth concentration. The East Side favors a more equitable wealth distribution. So the West Side favors deception. Well, when they're partners, they want someone who looks good, someone who has athletic ability, someone who has social status. Well, the personality, well, that takes a more secondary role. And if you could learn from them and they could learn from you, well, even that's kind of secondary. It's all about appearances, at least according to the West Side. You gotta appear to be a good couple. You gotta have the best looking husband or wife, the one with the most money and social influence. Where on the East Side, well, looks and athletic ability and social influence and wealth, all that's secondary to who you really are. That's what really matters. Well, anyway, let's move along. Now that we have a feel for the East Side and the West Side, well, the North Sides are extroverts. The South Sides are introverts. The Central region, well, is a mixture of all of that. So, if you're Northeast, you're an extrovert on the East Side. If you're Southwest, you're an introvert on the West Side. And so on and so on. So, we're associated with our imaginary territories. And I guess in a sense, we're part of them. But I guess, as I said, I often take a humble approach. And maybe just say I'm associated with them, even though I might be really part of them. Sure. Anyway, so our lives are just a dress rehearsal for something bigger, something more complicated, something where we will have more moral responsibility. Perhaps we'll have influence on helping people develop. Who knows? I'm just assuming that's the case, that we're moving on to something bigger, something better. As I said, something with more responsibility. A situation where, well, people might be dependent on us more in our next existence than they are now. Sure, at least assuming we're advancing spiritually along the way. where each life we live, assuming we live multiple lifetimes in our existence, well, each life we would advance a little more spiritually. And thus, next life, we would have the chance to influence people more, to help them more. So it's a sequence of building responsibility where each existence we have more responsibility than the previous one, and we have more influence on others, and we help others more. Something like that. Anyway, it's a complicated thing, what we're getting ready for, and there's probably a lot more involved than I realized. So we gotta get ready for this, even though we don't know what it is. Well, the best way, of course, is to have the best values now and to live the best existence now and to learn what we can now to advance ourselves spiritually, morally, and in every way. Sure. I guess even physically and health-wise. Well, so we strive to be better. So, with the imaginary territories, well, if they ever appear, if we ever coalesce, sometimes here with me, with my experience of the East Side, well, sometimes I feel a little isolated. Like there's not a lot of other East Side people around. There are more Central Region or West Side. And, of course, there's different kinds of people on the East Side. Sure. But I'm assuming when my side of the East Side, my group, which I'm getting ready to describe in more detail, when people in my group coalesce and come together and realize we are together and we're a bunch of East Side people together, well then we're basically on a mission. We're spreading our influence of the East Side. And in theory, we would do it with incredible choreography and dance, musical presentation, theatrical presentation, the kind of stuff that would blow you away to deliver the message of the East Side, the message of my part of the East Side, my section of it. Well, I guess in my part of the East Side, I'm a little more tolerant, I guess. In other words, I don't say one religion is the right one. No, there are many right religions, and no religion is inherently superior to another. They all aspire to God, and they all have positive qualities. We just have to be able to see that, to open our minds and realize that, and not be so exclusive, and not see everything as black and white. For life is not black and white. Life is more complicated. Sure, life is very complicated. So it's good to see life that way and analyze life for all its complexity instead of trying to simplify things by saying things are either all good or all bad. when in fact, almost everything has a little bit of good and a little bit of bad in them. Life is very complicated. So everything's a mixture of good and bad. And we just have to work with that and accept it. And perhaps try to get more of the good. Well, for ourselves, in a sense, and to help others by spreading our good influence, our kindness, our empathy, our compassion, our support. Well, that's the way of the East Side. Where the West Side, well, whatever good they would have, they would keep it a secret and try to use it somehow to gain advantage over others. Where the East Side would use their newfound knowledge or resources to help other people. But anyway, so we have to realize everything is complicated. It's a gray area. It's not black and white. Life just isn't that simple to be black and white, good or bad. We have to embrace the complexity of life with knowledge, with analytical skill. Sure, we have to be able to understand life, so we have to learn more. Well, that's what the East Side is about learning more and letting everyone have access to knowledge. So, in a sense, I guess free education that would be supported by the government and private institutions for the benefit of all people, so that everyone might learn. Education for free all the way through college. Well, so the government in the East Side system would support knowledge, but much more than that, they would be big on welfare. Welfare would be seen in a positive light. Sure, with corporations paying high taxes to support welfare, when in fact welfare is just a small chunk of our government budget. But conservatives like to exaggerate how much it really consumes, when in reality, the military consumes far more than all the welfare government programs combined, from WIC to food stamps to Social Security, Medicare, etc. All of that costs a lot less than we spend on the military. But we must spend more on the military. Sure, corporations make money off of that. When you spend more on welfare, well, then more people benefit from welfare. And you gotta pay people who work at the lowest wages, in a sense, minimum wage. You gotta pay them at least the same or more than they would get being on welfare. So if welfare benefits go up, well, then wages go up. Well, guess who doesn't want wages to go up? Corporations. So that's why they have such a stranglehold influence on the government to keep wages down. And that's why welfare is cast into such a negative light. Well, it's to make people support reduced welfare, so corporations could pay reduced wages. It's all about us having less and a few wealthy individuals having more. That's what the West Side wants. But the East Side wants just the opposite. They want a big welfare program with lots of housing. Keep in mind, funding for government housing was cut way back in the 80s and hasn't been restored. We need more government money for public housing. Yes, in your neighborhood. Well, that's the problem. Nobody wants government housing in their neighborhood, so nobody encourages the government to do it. But it's needed. Government housing, more food aid, more medical aid, more support for the homeless community, which I guess means more housing. And people don't want that housing, not in their neighborhood, so there's a conflict here. Anyway, and I guess the wealthy people somehow win out, and so there's less benefits for welfare. Because we want people to suffer. Well, the West Side does. And so that way they could get away with paying people less. Because they just have to earn a little more than they would on welfare. And if welfare is reduced, well, then wages could be reduced. And more people could suffer. Sure. Because that's what the West Side wants. West Side wants wealth concentration and less welfare. The West Side would encourage less education and more deception. And I guess when you have less education, well, you get to simplify things, now don't you? And everything becomes black and white. And then suddenly, people who might have been your friends, or it might have been a marginal friend, will turn into enemies because you see them in a negative light. So everyone's either totally negative or totally positive, instead of being a complicated mix of both, which really everyone is. A complicated mix of good and bad. And it's up to each individual to sort each individual out and figure out where their good and where their bad is, and if they're worth being a friend or helping.